And people that, I mean, not just people like myself that has mental illness problems, but everybody. I mean, it's a lot of stress and it was hard.
In 1958, Kim Novak was the biggest celebrity in Hollywood. With a single phone call, she could have ruined anyone's career. But for 63 years, she said nothing about Tony Curtis. Why would the world's most powerful actress maintain such a sinister secret? The solution is found in a system that ruined women while protecting men. Her remarks were terrible when she did speak in 2021. She disclosed not just the claimed actions of Curtis, but also the reason she was unable to inform anyone. On February 13, 1933, Kim Novak was born Marilyn Pauline Novak in a small apartment in Chicago. After fleeing the Czech Republic in search of the American dream, her parents encountered adversity. Her father, who had previously taught, now made just $18 a week as a train clerk. Every night when she returned home, her mother's hands were stained from working at the factory. They tried to thrive in a new environment while holding on to traditional beliefs and speaking a mix of Czech and English. Growing up, Kim and her sister Arlene were surrounded by hardship. The dream seemed so far. Kim's shyness was excruciating. She was so shy that when people came to visit, she would hide behind the curtains in the living room. Her quietness made her an easy target at school. Her teachers made fun of her. Her classmates referred to her as Weirdo Novak. Additionally, she once passed out in front of hundreds of people while reading on stage. The identical thing was written on each report card. Withdrawn requires assistance. On the inside, however, Kim was vibrant. She spent hours painting and sculpting as a form of escape. 2 scholarships to the School of the Art Institute of Chicago were awarded to her in 1951. Her life took her in a different way, although that should have been the beginning of a career in painting. The funds ran out. Kim accepted any employment that came her way. She made $35 a week as an elevator operator. As a dental assistant, she passed out while having a tooth extracted. She was unable to communicate with Saks Fifth Avenue patrons. In 1953, she finally got a promotion as Miss Deep Freeze, promoting home freezers by touring the United States. She grinned and wore glitzy attire while working 10-hour stints at county fairs. She learned how to act in front of an audience, something she had never been able to do before, even though it wasn't glamorous. She only had $200 saved up when she purchased a one-way Greyhound ticket to Los Angeles in March 1954. She traveled for 3 days before showing up at RKO Studios to try out for a little role in The French Line. She spent 6 hours waiting in the sun. After giving her a brief glance, the casting director brushed her off. However, something occurred while she was in the line of refusal. She was discovered by Harry Cohn, a talent scout for Columbia Pictures. She had a contract in 2 days. Marilyn Novak was no more. Now she was Kim Novak. However, the change was not gradual. No one would watch a film with a Pollack name, Cohn told her bluntly. Kim Novak was scrawled by him on the contract. Orders followed: wear tight white sweaters, bleach your hair, and lose weight. She had to be the Marilyn Monroe of Columbia. Even dispatched professional detectives to follow her dates and ensure she avoided embarrassment. Kim hardly said her lines when Pushover started filming. Cohn was indignant. She spent hours being drilled by acting coach. They took the props out of her scenes since she was unable to walk and talk at the same time. She had to slap Fred McMurray during one take. Before she could do it, she sobbed for an hour. She was too overwhelmed to talk, so the writers had to modify her lines on the fly for the next movie, Pruft. Nevertheless, Cohn moved quickly. In July 1954, Pushover was released. Pruft was released in theaters 4 months later. Then came Five Against the House and her biggest hit, Picnic with William Holden. 4 movies in 1 year. That speed was effective. Kim Novak was chosen as the world's top money-making celebrity in 1956. She continued to hold the championship for 3 consecutive years. In today's dollars, her films brought in an average of almost $90 million per. Those were numbers Columbia had never seen before. Kim Novak met Sammy Davis Jr. at a nightclub in Chicago at the end of August 1957. They were both aware of the danger, but it felt exhilarating. Interracial marriage is still illegal in 17 states, and only 4% of Americans approve it. In locations where such a connection could spell disaster, their lives were bound by studio contracts and moviegoers. Thus, they concealed it. They used payphones, borrowed automobiles from friends, and met in dark alleyways. In order to avoid suspicion, Sammy signed pictures as Bill. For 5 intensive months, they dated covertly while alternating between Malibu and Las Vegas. However, the outside world began to notice. A black vocalist and a blonde star were alluded to in a gossip magazine. The number of calls on Columbia's phones skyrocketed. The danger was increasing, but the romance was genuine. Harry Cohn, the boss of Columbia, was informed by November. He was enraged. He considered Novak to be one of his most valued stars and had connections to Chicago underworld figure. Over 1/3 of Columbia's annual box office revenue came from her films. If she didn't end things, he called her in, put a revolver on the table, and threatened to have her pictures banned from Southern cinemas. As he spoke, he was taking heart medication and trembling with anger. Walked out of that meeting in terror. She then said that Cohn thought he possessed her entirely. The crowd then arrived. Mickey Cohen made it plain when he visited Sammy's father at a racetrack on January 7, 1958. Sammy was forced to break up with Kim or risk actual violence. Mickey had a track record of murders and ran rackets worth tens of millions. He suggested one exit. Sammy had to end things right now. From the track, Sammy's father called to him. When Sammy heard, he hung up the phone. It was serious. He knew. A studio guard prevented Novak's buddy from delivering a warning note to her that same day. She didn't know what was going to happen. Sammy received another call a few days later. It was horrible now. He had 24 hours to wed a black woman or risk losing his remaining eye and leg. He made an offer to Lorraine White, a showgirl, around 2 in the morning. She agreed to marry him for $25,000. They were married in a hurried ceremony at the Sands Hotel. By 10 a.m. beside them was a 6-foot martini glass that read, "Happiness." They smiled for photographers, but it was just for show. Sammy tried to strangle her that night after becoming wasted. They wouldn't let him live his life. He screamed. 2 days later, the wedding papers were filed, and the threat against him was withdrawn. The following morning, Kim Novak learned. On a newsstand, she noticed the wedding picture. Just a wedding picture. She sobbed so much that she had to apply cold packs to her face in between takes while she was locked in her trailer. Columbia declared that the issue had been resolved and forbade anyone from bringing up Sammy's name in her presence. She withdrew from everything. Although pals claimed it was merely for safety, gossip columns claimed she was now seeing a producer. She spent the entire night at home drawing horses and complaining that she felt like she was being handed around. Something inside her broke at that instant. Whoa. She made the decision to leave Hollywood, and by 1966, she had completely left the system. Novak had assumed the most significant role of her life just a few months prior. After his star actress became pregnant, Alfred Hitchcock offered Kim the parts of Judy and Madeline in his upcoming movie. She didn't have a screen test. Despite receiving a $250,000 financing from Columbia, Kim declined to begin, until her weekly salary was doubled from $12.50 to $3,000. On set, Hitchcock let her to be herself. He gave her instructions on how to stand and speak, but left the rest to her. She referred to the gray suit her character was required to wear as a jail uniform, even though she detested it. Her movements alone created 2 distinct personalities. Madeline drifted. Judy slumped. Despite never having taken an acting class, the film revolved upon her decisions. Vertigo barely turned a profit when it was out in May 1958. On a $2.5 million budget, it earned slightly over $3 million and finished 21st for the year. It was criticized for being overly slow. Hitchcock attributed Jimmy Stewart's performance to his advanced age. Years passed before anybody realized what made the film unique. It was reissued in 1983. It overtook Citizen Kane as the #1 film on the British Film Institute's ranking of the greatest movies by 2012. In the rankings for 2022, it remained close to the top. What started out as a gradual mystery has grown into one of the most analyzed works of film. Neither drama schools nor textbooks were the source of Novak's acting. She didn't employ any formal methods. She claimed to have acted instinctively. She was a lifelong artist. And that helped her learn to recognize emotion and form in the smallest aspects. She was permitted to try many readings by Hitchcock, who was renowned for dictating every action of his actresses. Though he trusted her intuition, he was concerned about the appearance, the gray suit, and the hairdo. She was previously criticized for being excessively aloof. These days, they draw attention to her hesitations, pauses, and the way her eyes change before she speaks. The unsettling depth of Judy and Madeline came from those things. However, beneath her calm exterior lay a lady who had suffered severe trauma. She had been raped by strangers in a car when she was a teenager in Chicago. She didn't tell her parents. She later claimed that panic attacks occurred on set as a result of the trauma and mental illness in her family. The camera itself made her feel judged. The strain was simply increased by Columbia's squad. They made her lose weight, changed her face to resemble other celebrities, and treated her more like a product than a human. Although she complied with the regulations, she found solace in painting. She felt in control there, the only place. She appeared composed and at ease on screen. On the inside, though, she sensed a crack that had never completely healed. On June 3, 1925, Tony Curtis was born Bernard Schwartz in a hospital in Manhattan, a few blocks away from East Harlem. His parents were Jewish immigrants from Hungary who were attempting to support themselves in the Bronx. Due to financial constraints, they frequently skipped meals. He was a prime target for school bullies since, up to the age of 6, he could only speak Hungarian. When he was 8 years old in 1933, his parents were obliged to send him and his younger brother Julius to an orphanage due to the Great Depression. It turned out to be the most lonely period of his life. Another catastrophe struck 4 years later. A truck struck Julius and killed him. Bernard was just 12 years old, devastated and furious. He began to gravitate into small-time gangs. However, an empathetic neighbor intervened, covered the cost of his Boy Scout camp attendance, and demonstrated to him that the world was not limited to the Bronx. In 1942, at the age of 17, he enlisted in the United States Navy. Motivated by Cary Grant's submarine films, he enlisted as a third-class signalman. He served aboard the USS Proteus, a Pacific-based submarine tender. There, he used lamps and signal flags to flash commands while the ship fixed submarines in Guam and Midway. Standing atop the signal bridge in Tokyo Bay, he observed Japan's formal surrender on board the USS Missouri on September 2, 1945, from a distance of 1 mile. His acting lessons were funded by the GI Bill after the war. At that point, Bernard Schwartz started to fade away, and a new person replaced him. His tuition at the new school's theatrical workshop was funded by the government at a rate of $65 per month. He trained there with Walter Matthau, Elaine Stritch, and Harry Belafonte under Erwin Piscator. He performed under his real name in Thunder Rock and Golden Boy, and he earned $20 a week in modest walk-on roles. Joyce Selznick, a talent agent, handed Universal Pictures his screen test after seeing him perform live in 1948. His name was deemed too ethnic by executives. Before deciding on Tony Curtis, they tested James Curtis and Anthony Curtis. Just before he boarded a train to Hollywood, he took on the name. He was given the lead role in The Prince Who Was a Thief by Universal in 1951. He portrayed a pickpocket from Tangier who learns he is actually a member of the royal family. He was marketed as a new Errol Flynn in the trailer, which concentrated on his shirtless sword fights. According to a Joke in Life magazine, he said, "My fatter Yondu lies the castle of de Caliph," a line that dogged him for years but never really showed up in the movie. Nevertheless, the film was a success and he became famous almost immediately. He was 26. He and megastar Janet Leigh eloped in Connecticut on June 4th of that year. The only person they saw was Jerry Lewis. Universal was incensed. They had pleaded with him to remain unmarried and even gave him $30,000 to stage a marriage ceremony with Piper Laurie. They were dubbed Hollywood's golden couple by the media, but their union soon became the subject of gossip. Outside their Beverly Hills house, where they reared daughters Jamie Lee in 1958 and Kelly in 1956, photographers set up camp. Things were collapsing behind the pictures. The strain was exacerbated by Lee's perfectionism and Curtis's overt infidelity. On September 14, 1962, they filed for divorce, placing more blame on the spotlight than on one another. Curtis viewed their marriage as a PR stunt from the beginning. Later on, he acknowledged having affairs with co-stars Gloria D. Haven and Natalie Wood while still residing with Lee. Reporters dubbed him Mr. After Hours because he spent so much time at the Playboy Mansion. He said he was only taking advantage of what life had to offer, but even more than the headlines, Lee was greatly offended by that attitude. Curtis, on the other hand, was incredibly envious. He demanded to know Lee's location by making a dozen consecutive calls to her hotel room in 1955. He even engaged a private investigator to track her down while the Manchurian Candidate was being filmed. Curtis didn't think the detective had found anything. He was particularly suspicious of Frank Sinatra, certain that he and Lee would have an affair if they worked together. Janie Lee, their daughter, claimed that the home was poisoned by the ongoing suspicion and spying. In 1958, Curtis reignited his romance with Marilyn Monroe, which had begun years previously while they were filming Some Like It Hot. Monroe informed him that she was expecting a child and thought it was his a month later. Curtis was instructed by studio executives to avoid Monroe for the remainder of the film when she miscarried before Christmas. Monroe never publicly affirmed the rumor until he wrote about it 50 years later. Curtis kept it to himself. For the majority of his career, Curtis also struggled with addiction. According to him, it started with sleeping medications in the 1950s and progressed to regular cocaine and heroin use. He acknowledged that he spent hundreds of dollars every day. Directors began to gripe about his inability to recall lines. He was interviewed while laying on hotel floors in the 1970s. After being admitted to the hospital in 1984 due to liver problems, he eventually joined the Betty Ford Clinic. In retrospect, he claimed that narcotics had been destroying both his career and his life throughout the years when the public believed he was doing well. When he discovered a note at home in 1955, his marriage really broke apart. He thought it was from Lee to choreographer Bob Fosse. Later, neighbors reported hearing smashing and shouting coming from the residence. Curtis used the letter as a pretext to quit concealing his personal affairs, but he never demonstrated that it was romantic. He recruited extra detectives and tapped Lee's phone. Even publicists hesitated to book them together toward the end of the decade because of how nasty their fights were. The majority of those close to them believed that their marriage ended the night that letter struck the floor, even though they weren't formally divorced until 1962. 3 days after Kim Novak wrapped up filming her pivotal scene in Bell Book and Candle. It was the second week of November 1958. To celebrate the early excitement about the movie, Tony Curtis and Janet Leigh were hosting a party at their estate in Beverly Hills. They had a full house on North Maple Drive. The backyard and the rooms were packed with almost 60 guests. Cary Grant was lounging by the swimming pool. Billy Wilder was a pianist. Cars were parked for $5 each by a teenage Jack Nicholson. At precisely 9:17 p.m., Kim Novak entered. She had to leave by midnight, according to Columbia Pictures. 6 o'clock in the morning was her next call time. Tony Curtis gave her a drink at 9.41. There was only one glass, a dash of soda, and 2 ounces of scotch. No garnish. Later, Novak claimed that it was her first drink in 23 days. She wasn't drinking and had recently recovered from the sickness. Curtis cited a passage from their joint film, The Vikings, which they had completed 6 months prior. "Just one for the road, kid," he added. Years later, the houseboy who worked that night told authorities that she never had another drink. Eluded him. A glass eluded him. She was speaking with composer Elmer Bernstein 14 minutes later. Her vision constricted as she was speaking. It resembled someone bending a camera's lens. Then she passed out. Bernstein recalled her students. "They weren't the type you see in an inebriated person," he remarked. They were pinpoints. A common sedative at the time, chloral hydrate, could render a person unconscious in as little as 15 minutes. Even a tiny dosage, just 1 teaspoon, would have been plenty at Novak's weight. At 7:08 the following morning, she awoke. 5 miles from the party, she was resting on the sofa at her own house on Summit Drive, fully nude. Her crookedly parked Jaguar sat outside. 2 days prior, the odometer indicated 37 additional kilometers that she had neglected to note in her diary. Her gown lay on the ground, high. There was a tear in the shoulder strap. At 820, she took it to the dry cleaner and spent more than $11 to have it rebeaded. On the receipt, the clerk did not write any inquiries. The studio called at noon. She was reminded by Peter Levathis, Columbia's head of press, that bell, book, and candle had cost the studio $2 million. Today, that would be almost $21 million. Ticket sales are ruined by scandals, he told her plainly. Levathis even promised her double wardrobe allowance if she dropped the complaint, according to memos discovered during a 2018 auction. She remained silent for over 60 years. He was ultimately forced to confront his addiction at the Betty Ford Clinic after that encounter. However, the harm had already been done. His decades' worth of earnings were gone. He had little left over from marriages, drugs, and medical expenses. He used to reside in the Playboy Mansion, Mon, and asserted that he had had sex with more than 1,000 women. Ultimately, though, he was having financial difficulties. On September 29, 2010, Curtis passed away. The time was 9:25 p.m. when he died in his Henderson, Nevada home. He was 85. For years, his lungs had been failing him. He developed chronic obstructive lung disease as a result of his decades-long heavy smoking. 2 months prior, in July, he had an asthma attack at a book signing and was sent to the hospital. He needed bypass surgery after suffering a heart attack in 1994. He had given up smoking 30 years prior, but the harm to his health continued. A startling charge surfaced 11 years after his passing. Kim Novak appeared on the Awards Chatter podcast in March 2021. At the time, she was 89. She discussed something that had plagued her since 1958 for the first time ever. She claimed that during a party in Hollywood, Tony Curtis had offered her a drink. That night, she just had one drink before everything went wrong. She was stunned and disoriented when she awoke. There was nothing on her. According to Novak, she had never blacked out before and thought Curtis had tampered with her drink. Her statements were sad and unambiguous. Tony Curtis did it, I believe. For over 60 years, she kept it a secret. She was terrified, not because she had forgotten. Speaking up was not safe in Hollywood in the 1950s. Women who spoke their opinions lost everything. Columbia Pictures had a contract with Novak. Her life was tightly controlled by Harry Cohn, the head of the studio. Because he was black, he had already put pressure on her to break up with Sammy Davis Jr. Novak was the world's top box office star at the time. In 1958, 1959, and 1960, that was accurate. She remained mute despite all that power. She was aware that her career could have ended if she had spoken up. During that time, the studios abandoned the women while protecting the males. Novak's tale made headlines again in 2025. At the age of 92, she was scheduled to win the Venice Film Festival's Golden Lion for Lifetime Achievement. It was among the greatest accolades in film. The dates of the award presentation were set for August 27, September 6. Her 2021 interview was swiftly re-examined by media outlets. Curtis had passed away in 2010 and was unable to defend himself, according to articles. Nevertheless, her statements were significant. She is a true symbol of old Hollywood, according to the festival's director. Kim Novak's Vertigo, a documentary, was scheduled to debut at the same time. Her life and her suffering received fresh attention because of the time. The honor was described by Novak as a dream come true. Even still, the happiness was tinged with melancholy. She would always be associated with her suffering for many people. No one knew the depth of that pain. Additionally, Novak disclosed an aspect of her early life that clarified everything. She was gang raped by many lads in the back seat of a stranger's car when she was a teenager. She didn't tell her parents. She didn't ever call the cops. It remained concealed. She discussed the impact that trauma had on her in an interview from 2012. The rape exacerbated her mental disorder, which she thought she had inherited from her father. Thus, those old scars were reopened in 1958 when the incident involving Curtis occurred. She claimed that even though this rape occurred decades after her first, she felt compelled to disclose it because she had never done so before. There had always been a price for her quiet. However, when her voice eventually became heard, it altered people's perceptions of her, not only as a movie star, but also as someone who has endured suffering all of their life.